Good afternoon. We will begin this afternoon with the Vajradhara lineage prayer, which is on page 6. O Dorje Chanjen Delo Narotam Marba Mila Chuje Gambomba Du Som Sheja Kunjen Karma Pam Che Shi Chon Ye Ju Ba Zi Nam Tam De Da Sa Zon Pa Den Ro Ba So Sablam Chaya Chelang Anyepe Nyame Drogen Namo Kajula Sova Devzo Kajula Manam Juba Zeno Nam Thar Jinjilo Shen Lo Gom Je Kang Bar Sun Ba Shin Senor Guna Cha Shen Me Batam Tsendi De Ta Chebe Gom Shena Nye Gur Shen Ba Me Bar Jin Jilo Bogu Gom Je Kor Son Ba Shin Menga Tergo Chebela Malam Junda Sova Debe Gom Chen German Mogu Chewar Jinjilo Yang Me Gom Jing Wishir Som Ba Shin Kan Shar To Ping O So Ma Te Ma Ju De Gar Jo Be Gom Chen La Gom Shalo Tan Rawan Jin Jilo Nam Do Ngo Che Gur son ba shin ji ma yin ji yang char wa lam mangarum ba char ve gom chen lam kor de yen me to mar jin ji lo ge wa gun do yang da la ma tam dal me che gi pa la lon je ching sa ta lam ji yuen de ra zo ne dor je chang ge gom pang nyor to shok dor je chang ge gom pang nyor to shok. The Dharma expands pals, Vakanishta is the essence of all Buddhas at the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arises wisdom. So first of all, I would like to say good afternoon and thank you all for coming or for listening on the internet this afternoon. I'm very happy to see old and new faces. So it's wonderful to see you all. And of course, I can't see everyone who's watching on the internet, but usually when we check on YouTube later, there are lots of people who don't have the time or inclination to drive into the monastery who watch on YouTube, so I can't see you, but welcome anyways. And today I thought I would like to speak about refuge and devotion. So these are two kind of important topics. And the first one, refuge, if you really haven't taken refuge, it's hard to develop devotion. So we'll talk about refuge first. A refuge is a term that came from the very beginning of Buddhism. It was one of the first things, among the first things that the Buddha taught people to do. I mean, after he taught his first teaching about the Four Noble Truths and such, what he taught people they should do is that you should go for refuge to the Buddha, go for refuge to the Dharma, go for refuge to the Sangha. And so he taught this, and often in all schools of Buddhism, when we start any meditation or any practice we're doing, some people just to start the day, whatever, we often recite the words for going for refuge. Like in Sanskrit, you'd say, Buddham sharanam gacchami, Dharmam sharanam gacchami, Sangham sharanam gacchami. So that's the Sanskrit. You also can recite it in Chinese, Gui Fo, Gui Fa, Gui San. Or in Tibetan, Sanje Lai Chapsum Chio. Was that okay? You guys are laughing, so it must be okay. Sanje La Chapsum in Tibetan, Sanje La Chapsum Chio, Chi La Chapsum Chio, Gendun La Chapsum Chio. So we say, go for refuge to the Buddha. And so we've got going for refuge to the Dharma and going for refuge to the Sangha. And so the first thing is that we have to feel like we need to go for refuge. If you don't feel like you need refuge, how can you go for refuge? So what refuge means is you realize that there is a problem in your life. There's something wrong in your life, or maybe even more on a grander scale than in just your life. And there's something that you need help with, something that you need protection from. You need protection. So what do you need protection from? Well, you need protection from danger. You need protection from illness. You need protection from any sorts of suffering. So basically what we would call suffering. You might need protection from some, a particular person. Maybe you need protection from a coworker. I don't know. Or someone. So you need protection, and you need to, but even if it starts out as something smaller, if you really think about it, we will need a lot of protection at some point in this lifetime, whether or not we feel like we need it now. Because it's just the nature of our lives that at some point we are going to experience suffering. At some point we are going to get sick. It might be something comparatively minor. It might be something minor that hurts a lot for a short time, but really takes fairly easy to fix, like a toothache. It could be, an illness that takes a lot of treatment to cure, and maybe you won't even get cured. There may be other problems in your lifetime. The loss of someone dear to you, the loss of a parent or a child, a partner, a husband or a wife, whoever. Or loss not even through death, loss through divorce or conflict and so forth. Right now we have been in a comparatively lucky period of the world, but when we look around and we see the turmoil in various parts of the world, we can't count on always being safe here in British Columbia, even in British Columbia. And so we see that there's suffering in our lives and we want protection. But what the Buddha taught is that there are different types of suffering. There's the suffering that we identify as being suffering, the experiences that are painful, unpleasant, whether psychologically or physically. These are experiences we feel like we need suffering from, we need protection from, but also the Buddha taught that we need protection from more subtle types of suffering. Like there's a suffering that you experience when you have something good that comes to an end. Something pleasurable that comes to an end, and then you experience the loss of that good thing. For example, you are in a good relationship with someone, then all of a sudden it ends, then maybe they die. If you're a parent, there are many parents whose children have passed away, and then incredible loss. Or the other way around, you have a wonderful relationship with your parents, and they die suddenly. Anything, or a good friend who dies, who commits suicide or something like that. This is loss. You had a good friend, a good thing that in the end is impermanent and comes to an end. And of course, the big thing that comes to an end is our life. We might have a good life, a prosperous life that lasts, 8 or 9 decades, maybe 10 or 11 decades these days, who knows? And at some point, it's going to come to an end. And the end is painful. Unless your caregivers give you enough morphine. But it's painful to die. It's painful to lose people. You have good things. You might be rich for a while and then lose it all. The economy could turn and we could lose everything. And you can be forced out of your house for no fault of your own, but they raise the rent you can no longer pay and then end up homeless. And so these are the types of things that can happen. You have a good situation that comes to an end. And when you look at it, even the good situations that we have are not even necessarily all that good. You have a good life, but you still have a lot of stress. There are things you want to get that you can't, or that you have to work hard to get. There are the things that you don't want to happen that do happen. They're the things that you have that you want to keep, and therefore you put a lot of energy into keeping things like, putting your money in the right places and investing well, and you have so much thought about investing, and then things go up, they go down, and you lose it. Or maybe you lose a bit. People, you invest money, and people get really attached to it, and of course it really is nothing. It's just like a bunch of zeros on a bank statement, or maybe not so many zeros, I don't know. It's just a statement that you read on your computer, and it goes up, it goes down. It makes no difference to you in some respect, but you get so attached to it. The numbers go down, and people get upset and even commit suicide. This happens. So even when things are good, they're not all that good. So this is what we call the suffering of change. Everything good comes to an end. In particular, when you have a good life as a human, it comes to an end, and then who knows what's going to come next. Then a third type of suffering is that there's just the fact that everything is changing in every single moment on a really subtle basis. This is such a subtle level of change that we're not aware of it. We're almost not aware that it's suffering. It's just like it's not even really painful. It's like kind of a neutral sort of state, but it's always changing, and always changing. So it's like we have to continually keep working to keep producing, reproducing our entire world. And every single moment we're like recreating our thoughts and everything, rebuilding everything in every single instant. There's so much work that goes on in our mind because we have to keep, our world is continually changing, so we have to keep recreating it in every single instant. But we're not aware of this on a deep level. It's said that when you get to the point where you can actually see this, it's incredibly obvious, and you see how painful it is. But for us, ordinary people, it's hard to see it. That's the subtlest level of suffering. So when we use the word suffering in Buddhism, we mean the whole gamut. From these sensations that are so subtle that you don't even notice them, through all the pleasurable sensations, through up to even the worst of the most painful sensations, whether they be mentally pleasant or mentally unpleasant. These are the sufferings that we experience in our daily life, and we cannot avoid them. They are going to happen to us. There is nothing that we can do to stop them, we think. And then the Buddha found that actually there is a way to stop them, and so he taught that. So we hear about the Buddha, and so, first of all, in these days especially, you hear about the Buddha, you hear about meditation, Buddhism, it sounds like a bit of stress reduction. But actually the Buddha's, what would you say, in his project, if we're talking about it, I don't know, maybe I've read too much philosophy. His philosophical project was the complete end of suffering. His work was to end suffering entirely, not just for himself, but for all sentient beings. And he found that there's a way to do it because our sufferings have a cause. That cause being our own stupid actions, basically. We don't realize what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing, and we act in ways that we're trying to bring ourselves happiness, but in the end, we create suffering for ourselves. The short-term goal, we might even get our short-term goal. We might be happy for the short term. We might even be happy for what seems like a long term in terms of a human lifetime, but it will come to an end. It will be over, and as a result of what we did to get that, then we're going to experience more suffering. And those sort of actions primarily come out of our ways of thinking improperly, which means that we are acting out of our greed, our lust, our anger, hatred, pride, envy, misunderstandings, misconceptions of the world. And when we act out of all of those, there's no way that our actions can be really, really perfect. And so the Buddha taught us that actually all of those come fundamentally out of ignorance. So all we really have to do is actually all we really have to do, as if it's a small thing. It is a small thing if you know how to do it. All we really have to do is be able to see the nature of things as they really are. When we can see that, then we no longer have ignorance because we have knowledge. There's no longer, in English it doesn't work so well. In other languages it's very clear. You have unknowing is causing our suffering. And then when you know, there's no one knowing. No one knowing means there's no ignorance. It's so simple in other languages. In English we have these different words that make it harder. Ignorance, it's not related to our word. You have ignorance, so you don't have any ignorance. We can't really say that in English, do we? But you have knowledge, and when you have knowledge, then you don't have ignorance. I mean, Tibetan and Sanskrit is very easy. Marikpa, shikpa, avidya, and vidya. It's very clearly, you've got the avidya is the ignorance. And you take out the ig part of it, and you just have vidya, or not knowing. It's like knowing. So just knowing. It's just simply knowing. We just have to know the nature as it is. And so the way the Buddha can give us protection is that the Buddha can show us what we're supposed to know, the nature of things. He can teach us how we can learn what we need, how we can come to know our own nature, the nature of all phenomena. And that's how the Buddha protects us from suffering. The Buddha protects us from suffering by teaching the Dharma. So it's by teaching the methods that bring us to know. And when you know, then you're no longer doing the things that cause suffering. And because you're no longer doing the things that cause suffering, then you no longer experience suffering as a result. Even if you experience things that on the outside look like they should be suffering, you don't necessarily experience them as suffering. There's a story from the time of the Buddha. So I think one of the ones I'd like to tell, so maybe you've heard this one before. The Buddha and his bhikshus, his monks, monks and nuns, during the time of the Buddha, they would do a 3-month retreat during the rain season every year. And usually they try to travel someplace where someone agreed to give them a nice place to stay and feed them for a few months. And a lot of people who had faith in the Buddha and in Buddhism wanted to do this. So mostly the Buddha and his monks nuns would go someplace, and the local rich people or the local king or whoever would support them, and they'd have a nice 3 months where they'd be well fed and they'd supported, and they could spend 3 months devoting themselves to Dharma. So one year, the Buddha was traveling to a kind of outlying land, and he spent a little bit longer time there than he should have, and there just weren't should have. He spent a little bit longer time there than he should have if he wanted to get back to, the parts of India where people already had faith in Buddhism. So he ended up in this outlying place, and there was no one who was willing to offer them the food and a place to stay for the 3 months rain retreat. No one was willing, because they weren't Buddhists. But there was one person, though, one householder who said, well, you can stay here if you like, but I haven't got very good accommodations and I haven't got very good food for you, but you're welcome to stay. And since the retreat was supposed to start the next day, the Buddha said, okay. So the Buddha was there with a few of his monks. They had 4. I think there were 4 of them. Just enough, the minimum number for starting the rains retreat. So they were staying in the barn, and the food that the person had for them to eat was horse feed. Like lots of horse feed, but no human food. Horses would have been delighted. Nice grains. So they're eating it, and the Buddha is fine. He eats a little bit, he doesn't eat too much. He doesn't need to, he's a Buddha. But he eats some, and he accepts it, and he's fine. But his companions are, it's just kind of revolting. If you imagine if you had to eat horse feed. Eating horse feed. And So they're eating and they're having trouble chewing it because it's so tough. We don't have molars like horses, and we only have one stomach. I don't know how many stomachs horses have, but at any rate, we can't digest the same things that they do. And so the other monks were having a difficult time. But what was most difficult for them was the thought that this is the Bhagavan Buddha, the eye of the world, the greatest of all beings, the greatest of gods and humans. And he's reduced to eating horse chaff, and they just felt so, like, how can this happen? So after a few days of this, they say, how can this be? You've been, you are the Bhagavan, the Tathagata, the leader of the charioteer of gods and men, the teacher of gods and men, the greatest of all humans. And here you are eating horse food. And they were like really depressed about this. And then the Buddha said, it's no problem. And so he'd been chewing a little bit of it, and he took it out of his mouth, and he gave them each of them a little bit. And when they each tasted it, it was like eating the most delicious food that they had ever had in their entire lives. It's just like through the blessings of the Buddha. Because for the Buddha, yes, it would, for his three monks, who were also pretty advanced practitioners, they weren't just any old monks. For them, it was like disgusting, and for the Buddha, it was like the most delicious food that you could possibly have. So even though he experienced things that we would see as suffering, for him, they weren't suffering. And so the Buddha knows how to teach us to overcome our suffering. And the Buddha does it by teaching. The Buddha cannot go and just pluck us out of suffering and put us in the pure realm. Let's all be reborn in like a pure realm or a heaven or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's a lot of superficial similarities between, there might be deeper similarities, but at least on a superficial level, there are a lot of similarities between, Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic traditions, teachings on heavens and Buddhist pure realms, Amitabha's pure realm. They seem very similar. But, where was I going? He can't just pluck us out of this world and put us there. He can't remove our suffering. He can't do that. If the Buddha could do that, he already would have, right? If someone with infinite compassion has a way to remove suffering from all sentient beings, then they do it. So the Buddha cannot take away your suffering with his hands. He can't wash away your misdeeds with water. It is by teaching the peace of the dharmata that the Buddha brings us to liberation, by teaching the peace of the nature of all phenomena. And so those teachings on the peace are what we call the Dharma. The Dharma is like a path. You have to follow the path. If you don't go down the path, you won't ever get to the end. You won't ever get to the end. It's like, all we really have to do is see our own nature, but because we are so ignorant, we have such strong habits of ignorance, and in Buddhism we talk about infinite previous lifetimes, so we've got habits of ignorance that are pretty deeply ingrained by now, and so in order to overcome them, it takes a lot of work. And it's like making a journey. We often talk about this in many spiritual traditions in English. We say about making a journey. Following the path is what we usually say in Buddhism. But it's a similar idea. You start where you are, and then you take step by step, you go down the path until you get to the end result of enlightenment. Enlightenment means seeing fully the nature of things as they are. So in this way, the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, are the path that we follow. So we go for refuge to the Buddha as our teacher, and we go for refuge to the Dharma as the path. But we also need help on the path. Of course, the Buddha last lived, 2,500 years ago, or longer. Depends on which set of dates you believe, really. 2,700, 2,600, 2,500, I'm not sure. No one really is. Anyways, a long time ago. And we don't have the opportunity to meet the Buddha, but we can still practice the teachings of the Buddha because we have companions who can help us guide us down the path. And they're kind of different levels. The best ones are people who have gone down the path to some fair degree and have already had like the first vision, not a complete vision of the nature of truth, but can see it. They know what it is. They've learned something through the path. They have gone down the path part way, so they can take us at least part of the way and show us the way. You need someone to guide you down the path. You need companions to help you on the path. Someone to say, you're heading in the wrong direction. You maybe come over this way. And so that is what we call the Sangha. Sangha is a Sanskrit word. It actually just means like a group of people, an association, or sometimes we would translate it as like an order, as a monastic order. But really, it just means like a group of people, a Sangha. But in particular, when we're talking about a Sangha, the one that's really a refuge for us are those people who've gone down the path and have seen the truth, the nature of the Four Noble Truths, or the nature of the empty nature of all phenomena, and have then continued down the path to some degree, or even reaching Buddhahood. And so those are the people who are like the really beneficial Sangha. But we also have like the sense of the Sangha in terms of the monastic Sangha, like the monks and nuns who devote their lives to sustaining the teachings, to practicing the teachings, and to helping other sentient beings. And then, particularly in English usage, we talk about the Sanghas just in general, our companions and helpers along the path, especially in English, because in Western societies, monasticism really isn't all that common yet. So the people speak about their friends on the path as being people like as the Sangha. But ideally, the Sangha should be people who've gone a little bit further than us, who can bring us part of the way, right? So there are companions on the path, someone who knows a little bit and can show you along. So these are the three refuges in Buddhism: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the thing about all three of these refuges is that you have to go to them for refuge. Now, normally in English, when we talk about refuge, we'd say, take refuge. So take is sort of like getting and bringing back to you, right? Just the verb itself. I mean, of course, that's not necessarily what you mean. I mean, when you talk about taking refuge, if you are, in Israel, you take refuge in the safe room inside your house. If you are in Gaza, you take refuge in the southern part of Gaza. Neither place is safe, really. And so you take refuge someplace. But in Buddhism, we say you have to go for refuge. The reason why we say that you have to go for refuge is that no one else can do it for you. You can't take it and bring it back to you. You have to actually change. You have to go someplace. Not literally, but sort of figuratively. You have to go from where you are now as an ordinary suffering sentient being to someone who is beginning to get an idea about the nature of reality, a better idea about the nature of reality, to then contemplating that, maybe doing a bit of meditation and then seeing it. So there are steps that you have to go. So going here, emphasize that it's a process you have to do yourself. No one's going to do it for you. The Buddha said, you're your own protector. No one else can protect you. You are your own protector. So you have to protect yourself. You protect yourself by going, by taking the steps as you go. So that's going for refuge. So we go for refuge to the Buddha as our teacher, go for refuge to the Dharma as the path, and go for refuge to the Sangha as our companions on the path. And then we have to go down the path. There are different ways it's taught. Sometimes it's taught that it's the path that is the protector, because it's by following the path that you actually can get there. That's what brings you protection. Sometimes it's taught that the Buddha is the ultimate refuge, because it's only when you actually achieve Buddhahood that you really have complete and total protection. But really the meaning is the same. We have to go from here to achieving, to seeing the nature of the truths, to meditating upon that, and then finally achieving the results of the path. So this is going for refuge. But one of the big problems of going for refuge is that often it's hard for us to realize how to go for refuge. Or we think we're going for refuge. You may come someplace and say, I go for refuge, Khenpo, Khenpo, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Sanjela Chapsam Chyo, whatever you say. And it's easy to say the words. But then when it comes time to actually practice it, we still think, I kind of know. I think I know what I'm doing. This teaching sounds good. I'm going to practice this one. That teaching, I'm not so certain about. I don't like that one. I don't like karma. I like loving kindness. So I'm going to practice the one that I like. Or you might think, well, okay, Buddhism's got a lot of nice stuff, but there's some parts I don't like the karma. I don't like emptiness. I don't like impermanence. So you think, well, but there's this other tradition, and then there's another tradition, and these sort of taking things. There's the danger that when you do that, because we don't really know, pick a little bit from here, pick a little bit from there, and in the end we end up with a mishmash that reflects our own attachments more than it actually reflects something that's going to benefit us. I mean, it may have some temporary benefits, and when people do different spiritual practices, they do have benefits. Even if you make yourself your own sort of melange of spiritual practices, it does have some benefit. But the question is, what level of benefit is it going to have? Is it going to have a really lasting, true, enduring benefit, the way it would is if you actually see the nature of the truth, actually seeing it? And sometimes in order to do that, what prevents us from seeing that is our own ignorance. And one of the greatest bits of ignorance is thinking that not realizing that we're ignorant, and so therefore we think we know what we're doing. And so we say, I go for refuge, but we don't really go for refuge. We don't really follow the teachings of the Buddha. We don't really follow the guidance of the Sangha. And because of that, we don't really make progress down the path. How can you make progress down the path when you already think you know? If you want to find someone who's going to give you refuge, you have to be able to find someone who can actually give you refuge. You may have a safe room in your house, but it is not a true refuge, as people in Israel found out a couple of weeks ago. You may hear that the south of Gaza is a refuge, but it's not. You may think that you're safe in some other part of Ukraine than where the fighting is going on, but it's not. You may think that you're safe right here, but it might not be. You might think that if you get sick, you can go to the doctor who will cure you. But there's no guarantee. And so if we want to find true freedom from all these sufferings, we have to find someone who's gone all the way, who's gone part of it. And then when we find that person, we have to say, you know, and I don't. So like one of the real important steps of going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is to say, I don't know myself. And kind of say, okay, I will do what you say. And this doesn't come immediately. I think that all of us, when we start a Buddhist practice, a lot of people take refuge of some sort. And we aren't really able to completely take refuge at the beginning. And that's okay. I mean, it's not completely taking refuge. That's not so good. But it's understandable. It's not your fault. Because we're ordinary people. And so you have to look and see, is there something here that works? For example, for myself, when I first started practicing Buddhism 26 years ago, I was like, 25 years ago I met Rinpoche, and it was like, this makes sense. This makes sense. The teachings about how the mind works, they make a lot of sense. I'm not sure about karmic cause and effect. I'm not sure about rebirth. Because I grew up in, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, WASP in New England, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and, no cultural background for reincarnation. And my parents were not even really Christian. I mean, they were Christian culturally, but we didn't discuss it. So, I had nothing to go on. So for me to not, and for a lot of people in the West, to not accept karmic cause and effect is reasonable. Because you can't just say yes without really believing. Because it's... So my feeling was like, okay, this all makes sense. I'm not sure about that. But because all of this makes sense, I'm going to provisionally say, this probably, there's something probably behind it, but I'm not certain yet. Right? And then gradually over time, as I'm just looking carefully at my experiences and studying some teachings and thinking about things, it made more and more sense to me until now, I feel like, yeah, there are past and future lives. There is karmic cause and effect. There's no other reasonable explanation why things turn out so differently for other people, why things have turned out as they have for me. I don't see any other reasonable explanation that makes sense to me. So, I believe in it, right? But it took time. So it takes time to get to the point where you really begin to develop confidence in that. And that means that it takes time to really go for refuge and say, yes, I'm going to do it. Now, there are a few people who immediately know from the beginning. They meet someone and meet a teacher. They come into a Dharma center and they immediately know, yes, this is the way for me. And that's excellent, but it doesn't happen to so many people. It takes time. And that's normal. So there's nothing to worry about that. So you have to keep going, and you look at your own experience and you say, this seems to work for me. I'm not sure about that. But I'll not dismiss it. I'll kind of keep it under advisement, shall we say. And then work with it over time. And then finally you can come to a point where you say, yes, this really is so. I really do go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and the Sangha. I really will take refuge. And even then, actually, you're not quite there. There's a sense of, when you're really taking refuge, there's a feeling like, I really know nothing. I'm really totally ignorant, and I really need help. And so that's what we get from the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. But even then, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, when we say Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, sometimes it's a little bit difficult because the Buddha passed away we just spoke about that, somewhere between 2,500 and 2,700 years ago, a long time ago, over 2 millennia. The Dharma, or the teachings, and there are so many different sorts of teachings. The Sangha, sometimes you come to a monastery and you see lots of monks, and some of us know better and some of us don't seem to know anything, and you can't really tell who is worthy of following. And sometimes they may know, but they may be unable to explain. Sometimes it's a language issue even. And so, especially in the Tibetan tradition, we talk about how important having, there are a couple words we use for it. One of them is a spiritual friend. Basically, we're talking about a teacher. Someone who can teach you, someone who can say, this is how it is. And sometimes they give kind of formal teachings, sort of like I'm doing now, or sometimes they'll give teachings over, like a weekend teaching is common in Dharma centers here, or maybe sometimes you'll have like a long course and you can get teachings. So that's like a spiritual friend who's teaching you. A spiritual friend is someone like who's interested in helping you, who wants to bring you into the path of virtue, because it's doing virtuous or good things that brings us happiness and peace eventually. Not immediately, but eventually. And so you develop a relationship with a teacher. Sometimes you use the word guru. And guru is kind of like or the Tibetan word lama. Guru sounds like a really heavy thing sometimes. Actually, the word guru literally means heavy. Heavy with qualities. But it just means a teacher. And so sometimes you just happen to meet a teacher, someone who can explain the Dharma to you in ways that you understand. Someone who makes you look at your own faults and everything that makes you squirm about yourself and helps you get past them, which is not always comfortable. Someone who can teach you about how to let your mind rest, how to look and see the nature of your experience. So that's what we mean by a guru. Sometimes the people who can really do this are, on the one hand, if we think about it, they're pretty common, because you can look at the number of great teachers, even in just Tibetan Buddhism, even the small part of Tibetan Buddhism that I'm aware of. We've got the Dalai Lama, the Yawon Karmapa, Mingyur Rinpoche, Trungpa Rinpoche, but of course Trungpa Rinpoche just passed away a few months ago, and but lots of other teachers. There are a lot of teachers around, and so we may be able to contact a teacher, hear a teaching, get instructions, and follow the instructions. And then, many teachers have programs that you can follow. And so you can meet a teacher and develop a relationship, and if the circumstances are right, you can even develop, a good kind of a personal relationship with the teacher. If it's a great teacher, it's sometimes hard to find what would feel like an intimate relationship, but sometimes it doesn't have to be a whole lot of connection. It can happen very quickly. But someone who can show you what you need to know and guide you down the path. In a sense, you can think of this as being sort of like the function of the Sangha, your companion on the path, someone who's bringing you down the companion of the path. Another way you can look at it is actually it's an extension of the Buddha. The guru is like the Buddha. We often say this actually in Tibetan Buddhism. The guru is equal to the Buddha. The guru is actually better than the Buddha. And this is kind of hard to understand, because you think the Buddha was he awakened in his lifetime. He didn't need to rely on teachers. He didn't need to follow anyone's teachings. He sat and he saw the nature of reality for himself. And he had all these incredible qualities, like being able to turn horse chaff into the most delicious of food. That's even kind of a small example of it. When you read the stories of what the Buddha did in his lifetime, it's really amazing. To think that anyone alive now has such qualities of that is hard to conceive. So how can we say that the teachers are equal to the Buddha? Well, the reason is that the Buddha gave the teachings. The Buddha helps us through his teachings, right? The Buddha gave the teachings to his disciples, both monks and nuns and lay people. They passed them down to their teachings. They passed down the Buddha's teachings. They didn't make up their own. They didn't, sometimes the form changed, but the essence of the teachings was passed down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, for 2,600, 700 years, until we get the teachers of the present. So the teachers of the present are teaching the same thing as the Buddha. What's important about the Buddha, yes, being, tall and handsome was an important thing about the Buddha. Having a halo of light around him, as the historical accounts say, is incredible. And the teachers, when you see them nowadays, like when I first met Trungpa Rinpoche, I was kind of half expecting to see a halo of light, and there was nothing, I can assure you. Absolutely nothing. Totally ordinary. Because it's not having a halo of light that is important. It is not being tall and handsome that is important. What is important is the Dharma that they teach. And because the teachers teach the same Dharma as the Buddha taught, we say they're equal to the Buddha. They're equal in what's important. And then when we say that they're actually even better than the Buddha, that they're superior to the Buddha, this is really hard because clearly in terms of, having halos of light, performing miracles and such, they're not superior to the Buddha. And you'd think actually, how could anyone possibly be superior to the Buddha? Because the Buddha is Buddha means seeing the nature of reality completely. Absolutely nothing hidden. And other people can achieve that, but seeing the nature of reality completely and with nothing hidden, how can anything be better than that? Now I'm thinking of the ontological proof a little bit. Anyways, but nothing can be better than that. And so one person who's achieved that is no better or worse than any other person. They're all the same, on that same level. So how can we say that this guru is actually better than the Buddha? Well, the reason we can say that the guru is better than the Buddha is not that the guru is better than the Buddha in general, but that the guru is better than the Buddha in specific for us. Because we cannot go to the Buddha and see the Buddha face to face. We cannot hear the Buddha speak the Dharma. We can't even watch the Buddha teach the Dharma on YouTube. But with the gurus, we can see them. They come and visit many places. Gurus come and visit here. Teachers come and visit here. We can go and visit them wherever they are. We can watch them. We can read their books and so forth. The Dharma that they teach is the same, but their kindness to us, shall we say, is greater. Their ability to actually do something directly to us. So in that sense, we say that the guru is better than the Buddha. And even then, we might kind of intellectually get this. But it's hard then to really internalize it and feel like, oh, this is how it is. I mean, I think of course, with Trungpa Rinpoche having passed away a few months ago, it was like seeing that in myself. Yes, I've been able to say these words, the guru. I've heard Rinpoche say it so many times that I'm able to pretty much repeat what Rinpoche said verbatim. And in fact, I more or less just did. I mean, a few embellishments of my own, but basically what I just said is stuff I've heard Rinpoche say many times. But that's not the same as actually realizing in your heart the kindness that the guru did for you. Or what do we say? Or that the guru does for you, or that the benefit they give you. It's not the same. It's not the same as realizing that you actually need to kind of give up your own ideas and do what the guru says. Because if you had an idea of your own, you would already be at the guru's level, but you're not. I'm not. And because we are not, we have to follow the instructions of people who already know, or else we're never going to get anywhere. So there's a real sense of humility that we have if we're really going to go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Or sometimes in Tibetan we add the guru as the fourth refuge. I go for refuge to the guru. I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and the Sangha. If we're really going to go for refuge, you have to feel the sense of being humble, this sense of submission. This is kind of like I think in Islam it's a very important idea, the idea of feeling submission. I believe that the word Islam itself is in Arabic related to the word for submitting yourself. So this is a really important idea or feeling that we have to have. I don't know. You please teach me. I will do what you say. Right? We need to make that connection, and we can only make that connection if we let down our guard, if we let down our pride and actually do that. And in order to do so, we have to have devotion, which means that we have to think about the guru as actually being someone who has qualities, is someone who's kind to us. This doesn't mean that the guru has magic powers. It doesn't mean anything like that. The guru might look like a thoroughly horrible person on a certain level. I mean, sometimes you hear stories about teachers who punch their students. I was speaking with someone yesterday about his guru, and this guru has now passed away, but he was telling a story about how he walked over and punched someone in the face. And you might think, how horrible is that? You'd never stay with a guru who punched you in the face. And yet, for the person who was punched, it was like really helpful. So we look at him and we say, this has got to be a horrible person to act like that. If you read about the story, Khenpo David was indicted for punching a student in the nose. I don't think I could punch it. I haven't got enough strength to do it. So if I tried to punch anyone, it would be kind of like, like being hit by a fly. But if you, on that level, on that exterior level, you look at it and you say, what a horrible person. But in terms of actually how they benefit the people that they work with, that's what's important. And so a lot of the students have people like that. Or if we go back to the Tibetan tradition, we have, if you want a good read, there's The Life of Milarepa. When you read how Milarepa was treated by his teacher Marpa, absolutely horribly, just completely abused, totally abused, until finally he had no shred of pride left. Then finally, Marpa would give him some teachings. And then he went on to become a Buddha himself. So even when the guru doesn't look like someone who you should respect on a societal level, still, if there's someone who knows how to help you. Another example is, I'm just thinking about these stories now, they're all coming to mind. The story of Tilopa, he was a beggar. He was covered with lice, filthy. And Naropa came looking for Tilopa, and there was this beggar, filthy, and no one would have anything to do with Tilopa. But Naropa had heard about him and recognized him as a guru. Then he treated Naropa horribly. Somewhat more recent example would be, there's a biography of Dzapata Rinpoche, who was a 19th century Tibetan. And one of his teachers was named Jimmy Khyentse Wangpo. Was that the right one? No, it's a different. Do Khyentse? I can't remember the name. But he basically lived like a bandit. Really, I'm not sure if he actually engaged in banditry, but he looked like one. And he was really rough. But he was a great teacher. So you can't necessarily look at the external appearance. You have to look at is whether they're teaching the Dharma. Now, this is not to say that you should get yourself in an abusive situation. This is to say that you have to look carefully and see what's going on. The teacher has their qualities. Can you see their qualities? If you can see their qualities, then you will naturally feel devotion. So you have to be able to submit yourself. So you have to examine the teacher before you get involved in like a real feeling like teacher and student. If you're in that relationship, then you have to be able to look beyond the faults, because everyone has faults. People looked at the Buddha and saw faults. If people can see the Bhagavan Buddha as someone who has faults, and he's not one of the teachers who would treat his students horribly, punch them in the nose, or do various other things to them. He's not one of those. You read the stories that come from the Tibetan tradition, they're wild. When you read the stories about the Buddha, it's like he walked around and he told to talk to people. He didn't do anything. And yet there were still people who saw him and disliked him. So we have to be able to look and see the qualities, and the quality that we have to look for is primarily, does this person teach the Dharma in a way that helps me? Do they help me see my own faults? Do they help me identify my faults and then correct them? Do they help me in that way? If they do, then and you do it, then you begin to naturally feel gratitude. And gratitude leads to devotion, feeling like they were really helpful for me in that, and I think they can be helpful for me in other things too. It's not necessarily that being devotion is like, it doesn't mean that you necessarily always, what do we say, wash their feet, take them to restaurants, serve them physically, or things like that. It means that you feel that their teachings are going to benefit you, have benefited you so much that you just naturally feel like you really have to do what they do. So there's also a sense of giving up your own idea about what you need to do. So this is, I think, kind of the basics more about refuge and a little bit about devotion. Devotion naturally grows when you make a connection, and then you feel like this is benefiting you. And then you start making progress. Then it really begins to develop. So these are both important qualities for practicing. In the Tibetan tradition, we make a lot of, we speak a lot about devotion. Maybe it's not spoken about so much in the other Buddhist traditions, in the Chinese or in the Theravada tradition, but it's also there. People also still have devotion for their teachers in these traditions. It's an important quality. If you don't have devotion for the teacher, you won't want to go and listen to their teachings, right? So devotion is important. Most of all, it's kind of like a commitment to yourself. Commitment that I want to be able to overcome my own problems. I want to be able to overcome my own faults. And this person is helping me. So by staying with this person, no matter how much they don't do what I think they should do, you still keep with them because you know they can help you. So maybe you all have some questions? Yes.
Thank you for the teachings. I want to ask you, what is the process or what are the preliminaries for taking refuge, for going to refuge?
For going for refuge, to taking refuge or going for refuge. In the Tibetan tradition, we have like a formal process of like taking the refuge vow. When you're convinced that from now until the end of this lifetime you want to go for refuge, then you take a vow. And it's a ceremony where you recite the words of going for refuge after the teacher, and then at the end, they symbolically cut a little bit cut a little bit of hair from your head, give you a dharma name, things like that. So there's a formal process of that. Ahead of that, because that's like a formal commitment, making a vow. Ahead of that, you need to feel for yourself, I really want to go for refuge. So you have to study, you have to think, you have to be able to really feel like, yes, I want to do this. And when you feel in your heart, yes, I want to do this, then it's appropriate to take the refuge vow.
The ceremonies are, every weekend, or these are very long?
We usually do the ceremony on special occasions when people ask for it. Yeah. Sometimes we do it like for sometimes somebody came by and took refuge vows yesterday. So if you arrange it, we can make time to do that. Usually, Lama Pema, who's the main Lama of this monastery, gives the vows. Trungpa Rinpoche told me I could give the vows, but we're not always here. So you have to kind of check with the office and make a time. But yes, it can be arranged.
Another question regarding the practices.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I are taking sessions, of course, with another language from Mexico. So we're from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking these sessions online.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are getting some knowledge from this Mahayana teacher.
Uh-huh.
And we want to combine both of them, teachings.
Uh-huh.
So I know there is no problem regarding getting teaching from different languages. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I really need to have some questions regarding some practices that I want to go with.
Right.
Want to practice.
Oh, right.
The dream yoga.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I really want to practice.
Which one?
Dream yoga.
Jinjo.
Dream yoga.
Dream yoga.
Yeah, the dream yoga.
Oh.
Yeah, because lucid dreaming is a practice that I've been doing, and it's for me kind of not easy, but I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to practice the dream yoga, which I know that you need some preliminary and some preparation, and of course take refuge, other process in order to
Right.
to get these teachings from the Mahayana lamas.
Okay. So I'm going to summarize your question for everyone listening over YouTube. I forgot to do that with your first question, which is about the process of taking refuge, formally taking refuge. The second thing is that when you have teachings on, like if you're taking Mahayana teachings online, and then combining them with practice, is that okay to do, or how do you do it? So basically, when you have the teachings, generally within each of the different Tibetan lineages, we have our own teachings. We have our own sets of practices. And generally the teaching of each lineage supports the practice as it's done in those lineages. But it's also okay to kind of, they're not contradictory. Now, I mean, that being said, if you're going to be doing the study of the Gelugpa lineage, they're going to be emphasizing some things that if you were to do the Kagyu practices, we don't emphasize. It might seem on the surface like there's a contradiction. Ultimately, there's not, but the question is it helpful for you or not? So you have to make sure that your study is helpful for the practice that you're doing. And so, I mean, that's something that, if you wanted to talk about it privately, we could talk about that at some point. But in terms of your practice, generally, you need to go through things step by step. And particularly with dream yoga, which is one of the 6 yogas of Naropa in our tradition, there's different sets of the Tibetan yogas, and dream yoga is generally considered one of them. This is actually a very advanced practice. And so it takes a lot of preparation to do it. And most often it's taught in retreat. So when you're doing like the long retreat, it's like for the traditional 3 or 3-month retreat, it's part of the curriculum of that, so to speak. There are some people who talk about it online and such, but really the most important thing for any of those advanced practices is that you have to have a really, really solid foundation, extremely solid foundation. So and that foundation comes from going for refuge, thinking about the 4 thoughts that turn the mind and the precious human body, the impermanence, karmic cause and effect, and sufferings of samsara. Thinking about that really hard, developing bodhicitta, and then going through the stages of practice that prepare you to do those, because practices such as the Tibetan yogas, they're not gentle yogas. It's not like a hatha yoga you can do in a yoga class. They're dangerous, actually, if you don't do them right under proper supervision. So it's really important that you prepare yourself very properly. You can read about them online, but I don't or learn about them online, but I don't recommend it. If you have lucid dreams, enjoy. But don't worry about it. It's neither good nor bad. But if you want to do that practice in the future, then you need to devote yourself to doing the very beginning practices now, right? And then you can go through the stages to actually achieve that. It might take a few years. It will take a few years. Are there any other questions today? All right, then let's do a little bit of meditation. So make yourself comfortable. relax. Open your eyes. And then when you feel ready, begin to count your breath. As you breathe out, count that as 1. Then you breathe back in. You breathe out, that's 2. Then you breathe back in, and so forth. Count to 10. When you get to 10, take a little bit of a break, and then start over. Okay, relax. And we will finish our formal session with the dedication of merit on page 217. It's the very last page. Page 217. Osanam di tamje sepani tobne nyebe tranam pamche de jegana jibala trukbayi sipe tsole drogun yodroshon. So thank you very much for coming this afternoon, listening this afternoon. Now for, shall we say, a word from our sponsor. Tomorrow morning, I will be giving a talk on Trungpa Rinpoche's life at 10:30 here. There'll also be webcast, and we'll also have Mandarin translation. This class is requested by the Manjushri Kids School, so I'm probably going to focus primarily on Rinpoche's childhood. And of course, there's not enough time to say in one morning everything about Rinpoche's life, but so if you have free time, you should feel free to come by tomorrow morning for 10:30 talk. And then the second thing is that, as many of you know, Trungpa Rinpoche's, not all of you of course, but many of you know Trungpa Rinpoche's cremation is coming up in 2 weeks, and so I need to go back to Nepal for the cremation. Lama Pema has already gone back to Nepal, and a couple of the other monks are also going to Nepal. So, but during the next few weeks while we are gone, I believe that there are plans to continue the Saturday afternoon talks. I believe that Karma Tsindra will give a few talks. I believe that's what I was told. I'm not sure. And of course, I won't be here to police him and make sure. Otherwise, I'd be giving the talks myself. But hopefully, they will continue. Lama Pema will come back in December, but I won't be back for several months because I will need to do some translation work in India from basically December until March. And then I'm not certain how soon it will be until I can come back. So it'll be a few months before I'm back here in Nepal. This is a chance to say, what do we say? See you next time. I look forward to seeing you all next time when it comes in a few weeks. Of course, I'll still be here for a couple more days. But I will be going fairly soon. And so take care of yourselves. And if you, of course, have any questions or anything and you feel like you need to contact me, feel free to do so. Some of you already have my contact information, or you can ask for it from the office. They'll give you my email or whatever. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or anything while I am gone. So thank you very much.